I woke up to the sound of shattering glass and the roar of a diesel engine. I looked out my bedroom window, my heart hammering against my ribs, to see a yellow bulldozer tearing through the Victorian conservatory my late wife and I had built with our own hands 30 years ago. Standing in the middle of the crushed orchids and splintered wood was my daughter-in-law, Monica, pointing and shouting instructions to the demolition crew. She was holding a cup of coffee, smiling as if she were watching a sunrise, while she ordered the destruction of the only sanctuary I had left. I ran downstairs in my bathrobe, screaming for them to stop, only for Monica to turn to the crew foreman and say, "Do not mind him. He is having one of his episodes." That was the moment I realized my son and his wife were not here to care for me. They were here to bury me while I was still breathing. This story is going to make your blood boil, but I promise you, the payoff is worth every second of the anger you are about to feel. Before we see how Arthur handles this level of disrespect, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. We are building a community of people who believe in justice. In the comments below, answer this. If a family member destroyed your most widespread possession without asking, would you kick them out immediately? Or would you wait to plan a colder, harder revenge? Let me know your thoughts. My name is Arthur. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years I was a thoracic surgeon. I spent my life opening chests and repairing broken hearts, holding the line between life and death. I was known for my steady hands and my ability to remain calm when the monitors were screaming. I retired 5 years ago, planning to spend the rest of my days in the historic estate my wife Eleanor and I restored in the Hudson Valley. When Eleanor passed away from cancer 3 years ago, the silence in the house was deafening. I filled the void with gardening, maintaining the extensive rose gardens and the conservatory she loved so much. It was my way of keeping her with me. My son David and his wife Monica lived in the city. David was a soft man, always seeking the path of least resistance, which usually meant doing whatever Monica told him to do. Monica was a woman consumed by image. She was an aspiring lifestyle guru on social media, obsessed with aesthetics and status. When they called me 6 months ago saying they were struggling financially because of a bad investment David had made, I invited them to stay with me. It was the natural thing to do. Family helps family. I thought having them in the house might bring some life back into the old hallways. I was wrong. It brought a virus. The invasion was subtle at first. Monica complained about the old person smell, which was simply the scent of beeswax and old books. She began moving things. A vase here, a painting there. When I asked about them, she would gaslight me. "Oh, Arthur, that vase has been in the closet for weeks. Do you not remember?" We talked about this. She spoke to me with that sickly sweet tone one uses for a toddler or a golden retriever. She started cooking meals that I expressly told her I did not like, claiming they were brain food to help with my cognitive decline. I have no cognitive decline. I still read medical journals for fun, but she was planting a seed, not just in my mind, but in David's. The real trouble started when I caught her measuring the library. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was just brainstorming. 2 days later, I came home from a walk to find my library packed into boxes. She told me she was turning the room into her content creation studio because the lighting was better. When I confronted David, he refused to look me in the eye. "Dad, it is just a room," he mumbled. "Monica needs space to work if we are going to get back on our feet. You hardly use it anyway. I use it every day. It is where I smoke my pipe and read Eleanor's old diaries." But I let it go. I wanted to keep the peace. I retreated to the conservatory. Then came the isolation. Monica started hosting dinner parties for her influencer friends. She would tell me that the parties were industry events and that it would be inappropriate for me to attend. She suggested I stay in the guest suite in the attic, the servants' quarters, essentially, so I would not be disturbed by the noise. I would sit upstairs, listening to the music and the laughter, knowing that down below, Strangers were drinking my vintage wine and putting their feet on my antique furniture. I heard Monica one night through the floorboards telling a guest, "Oh yes, the poor dear is upstairs. He is completely senile now. We are just waiting for the inevitable. Ideally, we will turn the whole top floor into a master suite once he is moved to a facility." A facility. The word hung in the air like smoke. They were not planning to live with me. They were planning to replace me. They wanted the estate, the prestige, and the zip code, but they viewed me as a stubborn piece of debris that needed to be swept away. The destruction of the conservatory was the final straw, but it was not the only shock I received that week. While they were busy tearing down my wife's legacy outside, I decided to do some digging inside. I went into the studio that used to be my library while Monica was out shouting at the contractors. I found a folder on her desk labeled Arthur Transition Plan. Inside, I found brochures for the cheapest, most grim state-run nursing homes in the county. But that was not the worst part. Clipped to the back was a forged letter from a doctor I had never met, claiming I had advanced dementia and was unfit to manage my own affairs. They were building a case to take power of attorney over me. They wanted to declare me incompetent so they could sell off my assets, dump me in a home, and live like royalty on the money I earned saving lives. I did not scream. I did not cry. The surgeon in me took over. Cold, calculated, precise. I needed to cut the tumor out before it killed the host. I knew I couldn't confront them emotionally. They would just use my anger as proof of my dementia. I needed a legal scalpel. I called my old friend Bill. Bill is a retired corporate attorney, the kind of man who used to eat CEOs for breakfast. We met at a diner 10 miles away. I showed him the photos of the destroyed conservatory and the forged medical letter. Bill's face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen in years. He told me to sit tight and let him handle the paperwork. We spent the next 3 days setting the trap. The following Saturday, Monica was hosting her biggest party yet. She called it her estate launch. She had invited real estate agents, interior designers, and wealthy socialites. She was essentially showcasing the house as her own, testing the waters for a future sale. She told me to stay in the attic and not to come down under any circumstances. She even put a child safety lock on the outside of the attic door. That was her mistake. She forgot that I built this house. I knew about the service staircase behind the linen closet. At 8 p.m., the party was in full swing. Monica was standing on the grand staircase, holding a microphone, looking like the queen of the manor. David was standing beside her, looking like a well-dressed prop. Monica raised a glass. "To our forever home," she beamed, "and to the bright future we are building here, transforming this dusty old relic into a modern masterpiece." I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. I was wearing my tuxedo, freshly pressed. I walked to the center of the room. The crowd went silent. Monica's smile faltered. "Arthur, what are you doing? You should be resting," she said, her voice tight with panic. She signaled to David to grab me. "I am quite rested, thank you, Monica," I said, my voice projecting with the authority I used to command in the operating theater. "And I think your guests should know the truth about this dusty old relic." I pulled a document from my jacket pocket. "This," I announced to the room, "is the deed to the property. Or rather, the trust document that holds the deed." Monica laughed nervously. "Dad, you're confusing everyone. Let's go upstairs." "No confusion," I continued. "You see, when Eleanor died, I transferred the entire estate into the Eleanor Preservation Trust. The terms of the trust are very specific. The property is to be maintained in its original historic condition. Any structural changes, like, say, demolishing a conservatory, immediately trigger a clause that revokes the residency privileges of any beneficiaries." I turned to David. "That includes you, son." Bill stepped out from the crowd. He had been there the whole time, posing as a potential investor. He handed David a manila envelope. "This is an eviction notice," Bill said calmly. "And this is a restraining order. You have destroyed trust property. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. If you are not gone, the sheriff, who is currently enjoying a tartlet by the buffet, will escort you out." Monica screamed. It wasn't a ladylike scream. It was a primal screech of entitlement. "You can't do this. We have rights. He's senile. Look at him." She lunged at me, but David held her back, his face pale with realization. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew the look in my eyes. It was the look I gave him when he was a teenager and crashed my car. It was the end of the line. "Furthermore," I added, twisting the knife, "I have submitted the forged medical documents you created to the district attorney. Fraud is a serious crime, Monica. I suggest you save the money you were planning to spend on renovations for a criminal defense lawyer." The party dispersed instantly. Nothing clears a room of social climbers faster than the threat of legal action and poverty. Monica and David left the next morning. They tried to take the furniture, but I had security guards, hired by Bill, standing at the door checking every box. They left with their clothes and their shame. I rebuilt the conservatory. It took time and the roses are still growing back, but the silence in the house is different now. It is peaceful. But the story does not end here. While Bill was helping me dig into Monica's background to ensure she couldn't countersue, he found something strange. Monica had been making frequent calls to a man named Greg. Greg is Bill's son-in-law. And based on the financial records Bill uncovered, Monica wasn't just spending my money on renovations. She was funneling cash into a shell company that Greg manages. Bill and I sat on my porch last night. He looked tired. He told me he thinks he has a problem at home too, a problem that looks a lot like mine. We realized that this wasn't just bad luck, it was a coordinated attack. Do you think I should have pressed charges and sent my son to jail for the fraud? Or was kicking them out punishment enough? And what do you think Monica and Greg are plotting together? I stood in the lobby of the bank I had done business with for 40 years. Listening to a teller tell me that I could not access my own money because, according to their system, I was deceased. I looked at my reflection in the plexiglass, touching my face to make sure I was not a ghost, while the young woman typed furiously and looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. She turned her screen to show me the digital death certificate that had been filed 3 days prior. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. The person who had filed the paperwork and was currently in the process of liquidating my entire estate was my son-in-law, Greg. He had not just stolen my money, he had erased my existence while I was still walking the earth. I realized then that the vacation they had encouraged me to take, a solo fishing trip to a cabin with no cell service, was not a gift. It was a window of opportunity to bury me on paper so they could inherit the world I built before I even had the chance to die. If that opening made your stomach turn, you are not alone. I spent 40 years in courtrooms, seeing the worst of humanity. But nothing prepares you for the moment your own child decides you are worth more dead than alive. Before we watch Greg and my daughter realize that they buried a man who knows how to dig his way out, please subscribe to the channel. We are building a movement here. And I want to ask you a serious question in the comments. If you found out your child had declared you dead to steal your fortune, would you send them to prison, or would you find a way to make them wish they were the ones in the ground? My name is Bill. I am 75 years old, and for 4 decades, I was a corporate litigator for one of the most ruthless firms in New York. My job was to find the cracks in contracts, the lies in testimonies, and the weaknesses in the opposition. I was good at it. I made a lot of money, and I made a lot of enemies. When I retired, I thought I had left the war behind. I wanted to be a grandfather. I wanted to spoil my daughter, Sarah, and help her husband, Greg, with his financial planning business. I thought I was the patriarch of a loving family. I did not realize I was the target of a long con. Sarah was my only child. After her mother died 10 years ago, I poured everything I had into her happiness. I paid for her wedding, her house, and her lifestyle. When she married Greg, I had my doubts. He was a slick talker, a financial advisor who used too many buzzwords and wore suits that were a little too shiny. But Sarah loved him, and he seemed ambitious. I decided to trust him. I even let him manage a portion of my portfolio, thinking it would give him a confidence boost and help his firm's reputation to have my name on his client list. The trouble started about a year ago. I began noticing small irregularities in my monthly statements. Dividends that should have been reinvested were missing. Transfers to accounts I did not recognize appeared and then vanished within days. When I asked Greg about it, he laughed it off. He told me it was just portfolio rebalancing and that I was looking at the gross figures instead of the net-adjusted aggregates. He used jargon to make me feel outdated, like an old dinosaur who did not understand the modern market. Sarah joined in too. She would touch my arm and say, "Dad, you promised to relax in retirement. Greg is an expert. Let him handle the stress. You are getting confused over nothing." Confused. That was their favorite word. If I forgot where I put my glasses, I was confused. If I repeated a story, I was confused. They were building a narrative, painting a picture of a man in decline. They started attending my doctor's appointments with me, answering questions on my behalf. "Oh, he has been forgetting things lately, doctor. He gets agitated when he is confused." I sat there grinding my teeth, knowing that if I exploded in anger, I would only be proving their point. The fishing trip was their masterstroke. Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes, saying she was worried I was working too hard on my garden and stressing over the news. She said Greg had booked a week at a remote luxury cabin in the mountains. "Just disconnect, Dad. No phone, no internet, just you and the river. You need this." I was touched. I thought they cared about my blood pressure. I packed my gear and drove 4 hours into the wilderness. I spent 3 days fishing, feeling at peace for the first time in years. On the 4th day, I drove into the nearest town to buy bait and check my messages. That was when my card was declined. I tried another card. Declined. I called the bank, and that was when I learned I was dead. You might think I raced back to the city to scream at them. You might think I called the police immediately. But I am not a man who acts on impulse. I am a lawyer. I know that if you strike at the king, you better kill him. I knew that if I confronted them now, they would claim it was a clerical error, a mistake, a computer glitch. They would cover their tracks. I needed to know the full extent of the rot. I needed to know who else was involved. And most importantly, I needed to know why. I drove back to the city under the cover of darkness. I did not go to my house. I went to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. I called my old investigator, a man named Lenny, who could find a needle in a haystack if you paid him enough. I told him to pull everything on Greg. Bank records, phone logs, emails. 2 days later, I met Arthur at our usual diner. He was dealing with his own nightmare, as you heard in his story. I told him what happened. I showed him the fake death certificate. Arthur looked at me, his eyes hard as flint. "Bill," he said, "I found something in Monica's papers. She was funneling money to a shell company. I wrote down the name." He slid a napkin across the table. The name on the napkin was Apex Horizons, LLC. My blood ran cold. Apex Horizons was the company Greg used for his special investments. It was the company he claimed was building eco-friendly housing in Costa Rica. But the connection to Monica changed everything. This was not just Greg stealing from me. This was a ring. Greg and Monica were working together. They were targeting us, their own parents, stripping our assets and funneling the wealth into a joint escape fund. They were not just greedy children. They were co-conspirators in a massive elder abuse scheme. I had Lenny dig deeper into Apex Horizons. The results were terrifying. The company was not building houses. It was buying non-extradition citizenship in a Caribbean nation. They were planning to cash out our estates, Arthur's land and my liquid assets, and vanish, leaving us destitute and, in my case, legally dead. I knew I had to act fast. The funeral, my funeral, was scheduled for the following day. They had organized a small private service. No obituary, no public announcement. Just a quick cremation to destroy the body, which did not exist, and finalize the paperwork. I decided to attend. I hired a makeup artist from a theater company I used to represent. She made me look pale, gaunt, almost ghostly. I put on my best suit. I arrived at the funeral home an hour early and hid in the viewing room behind the heavy velvet curtains. At 10 a.m., Greg and Sarah arrived. They were not crying, they were checking their phones. I heard Greg say, "The wire transfer clears at noon. Once the cremation certificate is signed, the trust dissolves and the funds hit the Apex account." Sarah sighed. "I just want this over, Greg. I feel sick. What if someone finds out he wasn't in the cabin?" "Nobody's going to find out," Greg snapped. "The old man is probably still fishing, wondering why his card didn't work. By the time he gets back, we will be in the islands, and he will be a crazy old man claiming he's dead." They laughed. It was a nervous, ugly sound. The funeral director entered with a generic urn. "Are we ready to proceed with the memorial?" he asked. "Yes," Greg said. "Let's get this over with." I stepped out from behind the curtain. "I object," I said. My voice was raspy, dry. Sarah screamed and dropped her purse. Greg looked like he had been shot. The funeral director dropped the urn, which bounced on the carpet with a hollow thud. "Dad?" Sarah whispered, her face draining of color. You're a ghost." "I am very much alive, Sarah," I said, walking toward them. "Though according to the paperwork Greg filed, I succumbed to heart failure 3 days ago, which is interesting, because my heart feels just fine. It's broken, thanks to you, but it is beating." Greg started backing away. "Bill, wait. I can explain. It was a mistake. Identity theft. Someone must have hacked my accounts." "Save it for the judge, Greg," I said. "I have the bank logs. I have the IP address from where the death certificate was filed. It came from your home office. I have the transfer request to Apex Horizons. And I have the wire logs connecting you to Monica." Greg froze. "Monica? How do you know about Monica?" "Because her father-in-law is my best friend," I smiled. "And we compare notes." I pulled out my phone. "Now, here is how this is going to go. The police are waiting outside. So is the fraud division of the FBI. Lenny gave them everything this morning. You are going to go out there and surrender. If you do, I might ask the prosecutor to show mercy on Sarah. But if you try to run, I will spend every penny of the fortune you tried to steal to ensure you never see the outside of a cell again." Greg looked at the door, then at me. He slumped. He knew who I was. He knew I never bluffed. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing. "Dad, please. He made me do it. He said we were in debt. He said you wouldn't miss the money." I looked down at my daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, the woman I walked down the aisle. "I would have given you anything you asked for, Sarah," I said softly. "All you had to do was ask. Instead, you killed me." I turned my back on them as the sirens began to wail outside. I walked out of the funeral home into the bright sunlight. I was alive. I was wealthy. But I was alone. The aftermath was messy. Greg is currently serving a 15-year sentence for wire fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Sarah took a plea deal. She avoided jail time by testifying against Greg, but she is on probation for 5 years. I have not spoken to her since that day in the funeral home. She sends me letters, but I do not open them. I keep them in a box in the study, unopened evidence of a relationship that died the day she signed that paper. But the story is not over. When Arthur and I were going through the Apex Horizons records, we found a third name, a silent partner who was bankrolling the initial setup of the scam, a name that neither of us recognized, but who seemed to have intimate knowledge of both our families. This person was the one who introduced Greg to Monica. This person was the architect. Arthur and I are not done. We have one more demon to hunt. We are meeting tomorrow to track down this third player. And if my instincts are right, this person is closer to us than we ever dared to imagine. Do you think I should open Sarah's letters? Can a betrayal like this ever be forgiven, or is a child who declares you dead lost forever? The call came at 3 a.m., the hour when the world is silent enough to hear your own regrets. It was Bill. He did not say hello. He just said, "Arthur, I found the third name, and you need to sit down." I told him I was already sitting. He took a breath that sounded like a rattle in a dry lung and whispered a name that made the blood freeze in my veins. The architect, the silent partner behind Apex Horizons, the person who had orchestrated the destruction of my home and the erasure of Bill's existence, was not a stranger. It was not a cartel boss or a faceless hacker. It was the woman who had sat at my kitchen table every Sunday for 20 years. It was the woman who had knit a blanket for David when he was born, and who had helped Bill's daughter pick out her wedding dress. We had been looking for a monster in the shadows, but the monster had been holding our hands the entire time. This is the finale, the moment where the knife is pulled out and we see exactly who was holding the handle. You have seen Arthur lose his sanctuary, and Bill lose his identity. Now you are going to see two old lions hunt down the hyena that has been laughing at them for decades. Before we close this chapter, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We need you to witness this. And I have one final question for you in the comments. Is there anyone in your life you trust blindly? After this story, you might want to open your eyes a little wider. My name is Arthur. After the dust settled on the eviction of my son and the arrest of Bill's son-in-law, there was a strange, heavy silence in our lives. We had won our individual battles, but the war felt unfinished. Bill, being the litigator that he is, could not let go of the Apex Horizons thread. He spent his days in my rebuilt conservatory, which he now used as a temporary office, combing through the encrypted files Lenny, his investigator, had recovered from Greg's computer. We knew Greg and Monica were greedy. We knew they were entitled, but they were also incompetent. The level of sophistication required to set up offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the forged medical documents that were flawless enough to fool a bank, the intricate web of wire transfers, it was all too smart for them. Greg was a gambler, and Monica was an influencer. Neither of them had the discipline to pull this off alone. They were puppets. We needed to find the puppeteer. The breakthrough came when Bill traced the consulting fees that both Greg and Monica had been paying monthly to a firm called Trinity Solutions. The payments were massive, $10,000 a month from each of them, going back 5 years. That is over $1 million funneled to a consultant that had no website, no office address, and no employees. Bill managed to subpoena the bank records for Trinity Solutions by calling in a favor from a federal judge he used to mentor. We sat in front of his laptop watching the file download. When we opened the signatory page for the Trinity bank account, the name stared back at us in black and white. Sylvia Thorne. I dropped my coffee mug. It shattered on the floor, but I did not hear it. Sylvia was Eleanor's best friend. She was the woman who had stood by my side at Eleanor's funeral, holding my hand while I wept. She was the godmother to Bill's daughter, Sarah. She was a fixture in our community, a wealthy widow known for her charity work and her soft, grandmotherly demeanor. She was the one who had introduced David to Monica. She was the one who had recommended Greg to Bill as a promising young financial mind. She had planted the seeds of our destruction in our own gardens, and we had watered them with gratitude. The shock turned into a cold, hard rage. I realized then that every helpful piece of advice Sylvia had given over the years was a calculated move on a chessboard. She had encouraged David's dependence on Monica. She had fueled Sarah's anxiety about money. She had whispered poison into the ears of our children while smiling at us over tea. But why? Sylvia was wealthy. She did not need the money. Bill dug deeper into the past, into the archives of the old court cases and hospital records from 30 years ago. And there it was. The motive. It wasn't about money. It was about revenge. 30 years ago, Sylvia's husband, a real estate mogul named Charles Thorne, had collapsed at a board meeting. He was rushed to my hospital. I was the lead thoracic surgeon on call. I operated for 6 hours, but his heart was too damaged. He died on the table. 2 weeks later, Bill's law firm represented the creditors of Charles's estate. It turned out Charles was leveraged to the hilt. Bill, doing his job, had aggressively liquidated Charles's assets to pay off the debts. Sylvia was left with nothing but a small stipend and a burning hatred for the two men she blamed for her ruin. The doctor who couldn't save him, and the lawyer who took everything else. She had spent 30 years clawing her way back to wealth, all while plotting to take ours. We did not call the police immediately. Sylvia was smart. If we tipped our hand, she would vanish. She had dual citizenship and a private plane on standby. Assets Bill discovered were funded by the Trinity payments. We needed to catch her in the act. We needed a confession. Sylvia was hosting her annual Midsummer Charity Gala at her estate that weekend. It was the social event of the season. Everyone would be there. The mayor, the judges, the doctors, the socialites. It was the perfect stage. Bill and I arrived separately. I wore my tuxedo, looking every bit the retired, weary surgeon. Bill came in the back way, meeting with the technical crew he had bribed earlier that day. Sylvia was holding court in the ballroom, wearing a diamond necklace that I recognized. It was identical to one Eleanor had owned, one that had gone missing shortly after her death. Sylvia had stolen it. I walked up to her. The crowd parted. She smiled that warm, benevolent smile. "Arthur, I am so glad you came. I heard about the terrible business with David. It must be heartbreaking." "It is, Sylvia," I said, my voice steady, "but not as heartbreaking as finding out that my oldest friend is the one who handed him the match." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "I don't know what you mean, Arthur." "I think you do," I said, stepping closer. "We know about Trinity Solutions. We know about Apex Horizons. We know you groomed Greg and Monica. We know you wanted to strip Bill and me of everything we built, just like you felt we stripped Charles." She laughed, a low, chilling sound. She leaned in, whispering so only I could hear. "You killed him, Arthur. You let him die on that table, and Bill picked his bones clean. You two arrogant men thought you were gods. I just wanted to show you what it feels like to be powerless, to be eaten by your own creations. And I won. The money is gone. Your children hate you. You have nothing." "Not exactly," I said. I looked up at the balcony. Bill was standing there next to the sound engineer. He gave a thumbs up. Suddenly, Sylvia's voice boomed through the speakers. Not her live voice, but the recording of what she had just whispered to me. Bill had used a directional parabolic microphone, a piece of spycraft Lenny had provided, to capture the conversation perfectly. "You killed him, Arthur. I just wanted to show you what it feels like to be powerless. I won. The money is gone." The ballroom went deathly silent. The mayor dropped his glass. Sylvia froze, her face draining of all color. She looked at me, then at the speakers, then at the crowd of hundreds staring at her with horror. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bill's voice cut through the silence as he spoke into the main mic. "What you just heard was a confession to grand larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. The police are currently waiting at the front gate. And Sylvia? That Trinity account in the Caymans? I had a chat with the federal prosecutor this morning. The assets have been frozen since 9 a.m. Sylvia didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply collapsed. The facade of the benevolent matriarch shattered, leaving behind a bitter, broken woman. The police led her away in handcuffs, still wearing my wife's diamond necklace. As she walked past me, she didn't look angry. She looked empty. He was all I had, she muttered, referring to her late husband. You took him. His heart failed him, Sylvia, I said softly. Just like yours failed you. The aftermath was a storm that cleared the air. With Sylvia's arrest, the full scope of the scheme was revealed. We were able to recover a significant portion of the stolen funds. The Trinity accounts were seized and repatriated. But the real ending wasn't the money. It was the letter I received a week later. It was from David. He was living in a motel, working a construction job, the first honest work he had done in years. Dad, the letter read, I know I can't apologize enough. I was weak. Sylvia told me you thought I was a failure, that you were going to cut me off. She made me feel like I had to fight for what was mine. I see now that I was fighting the only person who was actually on my side. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know. I didn't reply immediately. I put the letter in my desk. Bill and I met for coffee this morning at the diner. We are two old men, scarred by betrayal, survivors of a war fought in our own living rooms. We drank our coffee in silence for a while, watching the rain. So, Bill said, tapping the table, Sarah sent me a birthday card. She's working at a bakery. Says she left Greg. David is pouring concrete, I said. Says he's sorry. Bill looked at me over his spectacles. What are we going to do, Arthur? Are we going to die angry old men with empty houses? I looked out the window. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about the conservatory. I thought about the capacity of the human heart to heal, even after it has been cut open. No, I said. We are going to make them earn it. I'm going to drive by that construction site today, just to watch. If he sticks with it for 6 months, maybe I'll buy him a lunch. Bill smiled. 6 months sounds like a fair sentence. I might go buy a croissant at that bakery, just to check the quality. We paid our bill and walked out into the rain. We aren't just survivors anymore. We are the gatekeepers. We learned that family isn't just blood. It's conduct. And while we might be willing to offer a path to redemption, the gate is locked, and we are holding the keys. This has been the story of Arthur and Bill. We faced the ultimate betrayal and came out standing. Now the final question is for you. If David and Sarah truly change, do they deserve a place back in our lives, or is some trust too broken to ever be fixed? Tell us in the comments. This is Arthur signing off. Take care of your legacy and watch your back.
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales like this, hit subscribe.